Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also, share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. Matt Crawford pushed open the door of his Capitol Hill home, shrugging off the weariness of a long day. It was 1915, and his watch, simple steel, with a leather strap, seemed to be the only thing that still kept him in reality after endless drawings and arguments with contractors. He was an architect, and the design of a new office building in downtown Seattle had sucked every last drop out of him. The briefcase weighed on his hand, his neck ached, but Carrie was waiting at home, his quiet, slightly absent-minded wife, who, most likely, was already fiddling with dinner or leafing through some old novel by the fireplace. He was waiting for her soft smile, her calm, "How are you?" her warmth. It was hot in the house. The air was saturated with something tart, not her usual mint tea, but the sweetish aroma of red wine. Matt set his briefcase by the door, kicked off his shoes, and tossed his keys on the nightstand. The silence was oppressive. Only faint rustling came from the living room. "Carrie, I'm home," he shouted, stepping forward. "Here, darling," a voice came from the depths of the room, low, with a slight hoarseness, from which a current ran down his spine. Matt turned and froze. She stood by the sofa, wearing a black silk peignoir that flowed over her body like liquid coal. The fabric hugged every curved chest, waist, hips, and in the light of the lamp, it seemed almost alive. Her brown hair, usually pulled back into a messy bun, fell over her shoulders in waves that shone like wet asphalt. Her lips, covered with scarlet lipstick, curved into a smile, and in her hand she held a glass of wine dark. But the main thing is her eyes. Gray-green, painfully familiar, now they burned with a heat that he had never seen in her. "Why are you frozen?" she said, putting the glass on the table with a slight clunk. Her voice was soft, but with an air of authority that made his throat dry. "Come here, now." Matt blinked. It was Carrie, his Carrie, but different. His wife, a librarian with a quiet laugh and a habit of blushing at any hint, did not talk like that. She didn't move like that with that cat-like grace, with a slight sway of her hips that made the blood rush to his head. He stepped towards her without even realizing what he was doing. "Carrie, you—" he began, but she interrupted, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt. The buttons crackled, scattering across the floor, and her fingers slid over his chest, warm, confident. "Be quiet," she whispered, moving closer. Her lips were near his ear, her breath burning his skin. "I want you, Matt. You won't refuse me, right?" He wanted to ask what was going on, but the words stuck. She pushed him towards the sofa, and he collapsed onto the cushions, looking up at her. She smiled slowly, predatorily, and in one motion threw the peignoir off her shoulders. The fabric fell to the floor, exposing her pale skin, and Matt felt his heart beat faster. This was not his timid Carrie, who hid under the covers and whispered, "Turn off the light." This was a woman who knew what she wanted and took it without hesitation. "You're too tense," she said, leaning towards him. Her hair tickled his face, her lips found his neck, leaving a hot trail. "Relax. I will do everything myself." She straddled him, her hands moving with a slight, almost teasing confidence, pulling the rest of his clothes off. Matt clenched his teeth, trying to keep up with her rhythm, this energy that captured him like a storm. She whispered in his ear low, guttural, with a hint of impatience. "You're mine, Matt. Today you do what I want, and you'll love it." Her voice was like silk wrapped around steel, and he obeyed. Not because he could resist, he didn't want to. This was what he may have secretly dreamed of, but never expected from her. Passion, fire, control in her hands. Time stretched into a hot, pulsating eternity. And then everything went quiet. She leaned back, breathing heavily, with a slight smile on her lips. Matt lay staring at the ceiling, chest heaving, body humming with tension and relief. She rolled off him, curled up on the sofa next to him, and after a minute her breathing became even and deep. She fell asleep instantly, as if the light had been turned off. Matt remained lying there, staring at the dark beams of the ceiling. Sweat was dripping down his temple. His shirt was lying somewhere on the floor. His trousers were in a heap against the wall. He turned his head, looking at her. Carrie was sleeping, her face smooth, her hair scattered across the pillow. She looked like his Carrie, quiet, calm, familiar. But what just happened was unfamiliar. It was not like her, neither her gentleness, nor her timidity, nor the 2 years that they lived together. He ran his hand over his face, trying to collect his thoughts. What the hell was that? His wife, who was blushing at the mere word sex, had just. He couldn't even find the words. It was hot, yes, damn hot, something that any man would probably secretly fantasize about. Passion, confidence, that power of hers that still made his hands tremble. But it wasn't Carrie, but different. He looked at her sleeping, and something heavy and cold grew in his chest. Something was wrong, very wrong. He stood up, quietly so as not to wake her, and walked into the kitchen. He poured water and drank it in one gulp, but the cold did not go away. Standing at the sink, he looked out the window onto the dark street, and the thought did not leave him what happened to his Carrie. Morning burst into the house with soft light breaking through the curtains. Matt woke up on the couch, his neck stiff, and the blanket he had covered himself with at night had slipped to the floor. He blinked, trying to collect his thoughts, and then remembered yesterday. Carrie, peignoir, her voice, her hands, everything. His heart began to beat again, but this time not from excitement, but from a vague, heavy feeling that he could not name. He turned his head, she was not there. The sofa was empty, only a dent in the pillow was a reminder of where she slept. The faint clink of dishes came from the kitchen. Matt stood up, rubbing his neck, and followed the sound. Carrie stood at the stove, wearing her old blue pajamas with faded stars, her hair pulled back into her usual messy bun. She looked like his Carrie, the one he'd known for 2 years, the one who baked him pancakes on Saturdays and got confused about street names. She had a frying pan in her hands, and the smell of bacon and eggs slowly filled the air. "Good morning," he said, stopping at the door. His voice came out hoarse, as if he had been screaming all night. She turned around, and a soft, slightly guilty smile lit up her face. Her cheeks turned slightly pink, as they always did when she felt awkward. "Good," she answered quietly, looking away to the stove. I decided to make breakfast. You went to bed late yesterday, right?" Matt nodded, stepping closer. He looked at her, trying to find at least a hint of the woman who was with him yesterday. But in front of him stood Carrie, his Carrie, with her hunched shoulders and habit of fiddling with the hem of her sleeve when she was nervous. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked, trying to speak evenly. "After yesterday." She froze, the spoon in her hand trembled. Then she slowly turned to him, and her eyes gray-green, soft, familiar widened. "Yesterday?" she asked again, and an alarm flashed in her voice. "What? What happened yesterday?" Matt frowned. He leaned against the door frame, crossing his arms, and decided to give it a try. "Don't you remember?" he said, looking into her face. "You met me from work, in this black underwear, with wine, and then we—" He hesitated, searching for words. I didn't want to sound rude, but I didn't soften it either. Her cheeks flushed bright red, and she dropped the spoon onto the countertop with a soft thud. "Oh God, Matt," she breathed, covering her face with her hands. "Are you serious? Did I do this?" He nodded, watching her. Her reaction seemed genuine embarrassment, shock, even mild panic. This was the Carrie he knew, the one who blushed at the mere hint of something intimate, the one who once tripped over her own words while trying to joke about their first night. "You really don't remember?" he asked again, stepping towards her. "You were different, completely different." She lowered her hands, looking at him with a mixture of shame and confusion. I remember coming home upset," she began, fiddling with the hem of her pajamas. "There's a mess at work with reports. The boss was yelling again that we weren't making it in time. I was sitting here alone, thinking about how to fix everything, and, well, I opened a bottle of wine, just to relax, probably too much. And then—" she fell silent, looking at the floor. Lord, Matt, forgive me. I didn't want to. I didn't even think that I could do something like that. He was silent, digesting her words. Upset, whine. This could explain a lot, but not everything. Not the fire in her eyes, not the confidence with which she moved. He coughed, deciding to come from the other side. What about the underwear? He asked. Where did it even come from? It's not that I don't appreciate it, it's just that you've never worn anything like this. Her face flushed again, and she turned to the stove, as if scrambling eggs had suddenly become the most important thing in the world. Linda gave this to me, she muttered, on our anniversary last year. She said it was for a special occasion, but I didn't dare wear it. Too. Well, it was in the closet in a box. I guess I just got him yesterday. I don't know why. Matt nodded, although something sank inside him. Linda, her friend from work, was loud, flamboyant, and loved to tease Carrie for her modesty, a gift in her style. But for Carrie, his Carrie, to suddenly put it on and turn into that woman, he looked at her as she fussed with the bacon and tried to see if he believed her. She looked sincere, scared, confused, but something still didn't add up. Sorry, she said again, turning to him. Her voice trembled. I didn't want to embarrass you or scare you. I really don't remember what I did. It's probably all wine. I won't do it again, I promise. He forced himself to smile, although it came out forced. It's okay, he said, although it wasn't true. The main thing is that you're okay. She nodded, placing the scrambled eggs on a plate. Breakfast passed in silence. Carrie sat opposite him, picking at her food with a fork, and from time to time casting guilty glances at him. Matt ate mechanically, thinking about how yesterday she whispered in his ear, how her hands moved over his body. It wasn't like a drunken outburst. It was too confident, too conscious. But he pushed those thoughts away. Maybe she's right. Maybe it's just wine and nerves. The day passed slowly. Matt went to the office, but couldn't concentrate. The drawings blurred before my eyes, and her words were spinning in my head. I don't remember. By lunchtime, he had almost convinced himself that it was all stress. Carrie had been absent-minded before, forgetting where she put her keys and confusing dates. Maybe yesterday there was just a breakdown. It's okay. But in the evening, everything collapsed again. They agreed to meet with friends Jack and Amy, a married couple with whom they had been friends since college. Dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the center, nothing special, just a reason to get out of the house. Matt reminded her this morning, and she nodded, smiling. Of course I remember. But when he arrived at the restaurant, she was not there. He called silence, wrote no response. In the end, he came up with an excuse on the spot. Carrie was sick. Jack, a strong guy with a beard, patted him on the shoulder. It's a pity that she's not with us, he said, pouring wine. How is she anyway? You said she was stuck at work. Yes, Matt nodded, looking into his glass. She's fine. I'm just tired. Amy, a small blonde with a sharp tongue, narrowed her eyes. Tired. She's been acting strange lately, haven't you noticed? The last time we saw each other, she suddenly started talking about going to Oregon, like you're going there, and you stood with such a face as if you were hearing about it for the first time. Matt frowned. He remembered that evening 2 weeks ago. Carrie actually said something about Oregon, about some house by the sea, but he wrote it off as her fantasy. They didn't plan anything like this. She was just joking, probably, he said, although he doubted it himself. He returned late, around 11. Carrie was at home, sitting on the couch with a book, wearing the same blue pajamas. She raised her head and smiled. Where have you been? He asked, trying not to lose his temper. We agreed on dinner with Jack and Amy. Her smile faltered. She blinked, looking at him in slight surprise. Dinner? She asked again. What dinner? The one I reminded you about this morning, he said, feeling irritation growing in his chest. You said you remember. She hesitated and lowered the book onto her lap. Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. I completely forgot. My head was full of work. I didn't even look at the time. Did you travel alone? Yes, he answered briefly. I had to get out. She pursed her lips guiltily and reached out to him. I'm sorry, please. I didn't want to let you down. I'll get better, I promise. He nodded, although everything was boiling inside. This was not her first forgetfulness, but today it hit harder. He went into the bedroom, threw his jacket on a chair, and lay down without undressing. Carrie came later, quietly slipped under the blanket, and hugged him from behind. Her breath was warm, soothing, and he almost relaxed. Almost. In the dead of night, he was awakened by a sound. Quiet but persistent. Whisper. He opened his eyes, listening. Carrie wasn't there, the sheet on her side was cold. The light from under the bathroom door made its way into the room in a thin strip. He sat up, straining to hear. The voice is her voice, but too low, too harsh. She spoke quickly, abruptly, as if she was arguing with someone. No, not now. Please. That's enough. Matt stood up, walked over to the door, and opened it an inch. Carrie stood at the sink, her back to him, her hair falling in her face. She looked in the mirror, but not at herself. Her gaze was empty, unfocused. Her lips moved, whispering something inaudible, and her hands squeezed the edge of the sink until her knuckles turned white. Carrie, he called quietly. She shuddered and turned around sharply. Her eyes were wide open, but after a second she smiled the same soft, guilty smile. Oh, did I wake you up? She said, rubbing her neck. Sorry, just not sleeping. I'll go to bed. She walked past him, slipping back into bed. Matt stood looking at the empty bathroom and felt the cold seep into his bones. She whispered to herself. I argued with myself. And this was not the first time. He remembered hearing something similar a couple of weeks ago, but chalked it up to a dream. Now he wasn't sure. He lay down next to her, but sleep did not come. Carrie was breathing evenly, pressed against him, but he looked into the darkness and thought, who is she? And why did he increasingly feel that the woman next to him was not who he took her for? The next morning began with the usual ritual. Carrie was up early, her blue pajamas rustling as she busied herself in the kitchen making coffee. Matt lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her something inaudible, a quiet melody he had heard hundreds of times. I'm going, she shouted from the hallway, pulling on her coat. See you in the evening. Don't forget the trash, okay? Uh-huh, he responded without getting up. The door slammed and the house fell silent. Matt stood up, rubbing his eyes. He stayed up almost all night, replaying her words and her behavior in his head. She looked sincere, but something didn't add up. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself some cold coffee, and sat down at the table, staring into his mug. Thoughts were spinning, clinging to each other like gears in a broken mechanism. Yesterday, she talked about underwear, a black peignoir, a gift from Linda. It was in the closet, in a box. He remembered her embarrassed look, how she fiddled with the hem of her pajamas while telling this. Then he nodded, swallowed her explanation, but now it gnawed at him from the inside. Why did she take out this box yesterday? Why did you put on something that had lain untouched for a year? And why couldn't he get her voice out of his head, the other, low and powerful one that whispered in his ear 2 days ago? He finished his coffee, put the mug in the sink, and headed to the bedroom. The wardrobe stood against the wall, old oak, with peeling paint on the corners. Carrie loved it for its vintage charm, although Matt thought it was just taking up space. He opened the doors, inhaling the smell of her perfume, light, floral, familiar. On the top shelf were her sweaters, neatly folded, and below were his shirts. And somewhere there, under the books and boxes, there must be what she was talking about. He reached for a stack of books, old novels, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, a couple of tattered volumes of Dickens. Under them was a small cardboard box with the logo of some lingerie store. Matt took it in his hands, feeling his heart beat faster. The lid was slightly open, and inside lay the same peignoir black silk, folded carelessly, as if it had been thrust there in a hurry. He ran his fingers over the fabric, remembering how it flowed over her skin, and immediately pulled his hand away. But the box wasn't the only thing in there. Beneath it, pressed against the back wall of the closet, another thing was sticking out, something dark, leather, almost invisible against the shadows. Matt frowned, pushed the box and books aside, and pulled out his find. It was a diary. Small, with a worn cover the color of old wine, with a metal clasp that broke long ago. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the coldness growing in his chest. Carrie never kept a diary. She laughed at such things, said that her life was too boring to write about. He sat down on the bed, placed the diary on his lap, and opened the first page. The handwriting was unfamiliar sharp, slanted to the right, not at all like Carrie's neat, rounded letters. She wrote to-do lists on sticky notes, left him notes with hearts, but this was different. Matt skimmed the first lines, and the air in the room became thicker. Finally, this Matt went on a business trip. The night was hot. Peter came again. I knew that he would come. All men are like that, they say. I love my wife. But as soon as they try me, they can't stop anymore. Carrie was sleeping, as always, somewhere deep inside, and I could finally breathe. She prevents me from enjoying this weakness of hers, her tears. But I'm stronger. I'm taking mine. Matt froze, rereading the words. He came again. Carrie was asleep. I'll take mine. It wasn't about him. He gritted his teeth, scrolling further. The pages were full of notes, and I started to feel nauseous. Yesterday, there was a bar on Pike Street. A stranger with a tattoo on his neck. He called me baby, and I let him right there in the dark corner. Carrie didn't even move. She's so useless when I'm driving. I want more. I want everything. He closed the diary, but his fingers were trembling. It wasn't Carrie, not his Carrie. The handwriting, the words, that tone, everything screamed about someone else. But how? He stood up and walked around the room, trying to collect his thoughts. Maybe it's old. Maybe she wrote this before him, before their marriage. But the dates in the corners of the pages are recent, some only a couple of weeks old. He opened another entry, closer to the middle. Matt thinks he knows me. He looks at her Carrie and sees his sweet wife. But I'm here, always here, and I laugh at him. Last night I took him, and he didn't even know who he was with. He's a good boy, but he's so blind. Carrie doesn't deserve him. I do. Matt dropped the diary onto the bed as if it had burned him. Last night. 2 days ago. It was about that evening, the wine, the peignoir, her voice, her hands. But she said she didn't remember. She said it was wine and stress. And now these words, I took him. He didn't understand who he was with. He grabbed his head, trying to breathe. It was impossible. It was crazy. He returned to the closet and looked again, hoping to find something, anything that would explain it. But there were only books, a box, and emptiness. The diary lay on the bed, open to the same page, and Matt felt his mind coming apart at the seams. Who wrote this, and why was it hidden in their closet under her things? He sat down, looking at the diary, and tried to remember everything he knew about Carrie. 2 years of marriage. A year before they dated. She was absent-minded. Yes, she forgot things, mixed up dates, and sometimes closed in on herself. There were a lot of small details, but he chalked it up to fatigue. And now he didn't know what to think. Her whispers at night, her memory lapses, her behavior 2 days ago. And this diary, with its alien voice, alien desires. Matt took the diary in his hands and flipped through a few more pages. Each entry was like a blow sex with strangers, parties on his trips that he didn't know about, phrases like, Carrie is disturbing my life, and I'll take whatever I want. He stopped at the last entry, dated the day before yesterday. He came home tired, and I decided to play. Soon he will find out the truth, but not now. We will have to do everything with him gradually. Matt slammed the diary shut, threw it on the bed, and walked to the window. The street behind the glass was empty, gray, like his thoughts. It was about him, about that night. But who wrote this? And how could Carrie not know? He remembered her embarrassment in the morning, her, I'm sorry, her explanations about wine and work. She looked sincere. But the diary said something else. He returned to the bed, took the diary, and hid it back in the closet, under the books. Until he figures it out, he won't tell her anything. But now he knew something was wrong, very wrong, and this something lived in their house, in her body, in her head. He looked at the closet, feeling the cold creeping into his bones, and thought, "Who are you, Carrie? And who do I live with?" Matt spent the entire day after finding the diary in a strange daze. He sat in the office, looking at the drawings of the new building, but the lines blurred before his eyes, turning into sharp letters of someone else's handwriting. Carrie was sleeping, stranger with a tattoo. These phrases played in his head like a broken record, and he couldn't turn them off. Carrie returned in the evening, tired, with a smile and a box of pizza in her hands. "I didn't want to cook, I'm sorry." She looked as always, soft, slightly absent-minded, his Carrie. But now he looked at her and saw a shadow, something he couldn't explain. He didn't tell her about the diary. He didn't ask about the whispers in the bathroom, about the forgotten meeting, about that night with the wine. Instead, he nodded, ate a slice of pizza, and went into the bedroom, pretending to be tired. But he couldn't sleep. Lying in the dark, he listened to her breathing even, calm, and thought, "Who are you? And what are you hiding?" By morning, he had a plan in mind. He couldn't just wait for that something to manifest itself. He needed proof, something more than the diary he now hid in his desk drawer, wrapped in an old t-shirt. He decided to follow her. Not out of jealousy, not out of anger, out of the need to understand what is happening. If she really isn't who she says she is, he needs to see it. "I'm on a business trip," he said in the morning at breakfast, trying to sound casual. "In Tacoma. The project for a shopping center there. I need to meet with the client. I'll be back tomorrow evening." Carrie looked up from her plate of toast, her gray-green eyes blinking. "Oh, really?" she said, taking a bite. "I thought you said that this project was frozen." Matt froze, but quickly pulled himself together. She was right, he mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. Her memory sometimes gave out such surprises. She forgot important things, but clung to the little things. "Yes, but they changed their minds," he lied, shrugging. "The money was found, so I'll go after lunch and spend the night there." She nodded and smiled her soft smile. "Okay, be careful on the road. Call me when you get there, okay?" "Of course," he answered, feeling the lie burning his throat. In the afternoon, he packed his bag just for show, in case she noticed, and left. But instead of turning onto the highway toward Tacoma, he parked a couple of blocks away, at a coffee shop where his car would be out of sight. From there, he could see their street quiet, lined with old houses with maple trees along the sidewalks. He sat in the car, sipping coffee from a paper cup, and waited. The hours passed slowly, the sky darkened, and he kept looking at their house, wondering what she was doing there alone. Carrie left at 9 o'clock in the evening. He noticed her silhouette in the living room window. She turned off the light, and then appeared on the porch, in a dark coat and with a bag over her shoulder. Matt tensed and bent lower, although she could hardly see him. She walked down the steps. Her gait was light, confident, not the one he was used to seeing when she carried stacks of books home or whined about the rain. She reached the corner of the street and stopped, looking somewhere into the darkness. A minute later, a car pulled up, a black sedan, old, with a slightly worn bumper. Matt squinted, trying to see the driver, but the windows were tinted. Carrie opened the passenger door and got in. The car started moving, and without hesitation, he started the engine, keeping his distance. My heart was pounding. My fingers clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He didn't know what he was waiting for, but he knew he couldn't stop. They drove for about 20 minutes, weaving through the narrow streets of Capitol Hill, until the sedan stopped at the bar on Pike Street, the same one he had read about in the diary. Matt parked across the street, turning off his headlights, and pulled out his phone. He had not planned to film, but now it seemed the only way to capture what he saw. The camera shook in his hands as he adjusted the focus. The sedan door opened and a man got out. Tall, thin, wearing a leather jacket. The face was hard to see because the street lamp was shining at an angle, but Matt noticed a dark line of tattoo peeking out from under his collar. The man walked around the car, opened Carrie's door, and extended his hand to her. She walked out, and Matt almost dropped the phone. The coat opened, revealing a tight dress, red, short, not at all her style. Her hair was loose, shining in the light of the lantern, and her gait was the same as 2 days ago when she pushed him onto the sofa, confident, almost predatory. She smiled at the man slowly, suggestively, and he put his arm around her waist, pulling her towards him. Matt turned on the recording. The camera caught the moment when the man leaned towards her, whispered something, and then their lips met. The kiss was long, greedy, and Matt felt his inside squeezing. He wanted to look away, but couldn't. And then the man pulled away, laughed, and said loudly, so that Matt heard through the slightly open window, "Violetta, you are on fire today." Violetta. The name struck him like lightning. He froze, looking at the phone screen, where Carrie or someone in her body was laughing back, throwing her head back. Her voice was low, hoarse, not at all what he heard in the morning at breakfast. "You haven't seen what I'm capable of yet," she replied, slapping the man on the chest. They walked toward the bar, hugging each other, and Matt sat there, not moving, until their silhouettes disappeared through the door. The phone was still filming an empty street, a flashing neon sign, a black sedan. He turned off the recording, dropped his hands to his knees, and inhaled, trying to calm his breathing. Violetta. This name was not accidental. It was in the diary. He remembered the lines he read yesterday. "I am stronger. I take what is mine." And now he saw it with his own eyes. He opened the video and watched it again. The quality was lousy, the light was dim, but the kiss was clear. Matt clenched his teeth, feeling anger and fear mixing in his chest. This was not just betrayal. There was something more, something dark that lived within her, and he didn't know how to deal with it. He sat in the car for another hour, looking at the bar. They didn't come out. At some point, he started the engine and drove away, not home, but to a motel on the outskirts, where he rented a room. Lying on the hard bed, he looked at the ceiling and played the video over and over again. Her laughter, her voice, her lips on other people's lips. Violetta. Who is she? And where was his Carrie in all this? In the morning, he called her as promised. Her voice was sleepy and soft. "Did you get there okay?" she asked. "Yes," he lied, looking at the phone with the recording on the screen. "Everything is fine. How are you?" "I slept like the dead," she answered with a slight laugh. "Miss you." "Me too," he said, although the words stuck in his throat. He hung up the phone, closing his eyes, thinking about how he was going to figure out all this crap that Carrie or Violet or whoever she was had dumped on his head. Matt stayed up all night after filming the video. He lay in the motel, looking at the cracked ceiling, and the phone with the recording lay nearby, screen down. He turned the pillow over, trying to find coolness, but his thoughts returned to that moment, to her lips on someone else's lips, to her gait, to that name. Violetta. It was in the diary, it was in the bar, and now it was in his life. In the morning, he made a decision. It was unbearable to lie there and wonder any longer. He needed to do something, find out something. He remembered the address of the bar on Pike Street, the same one where she had gone with the man. If Violetta, whoever she is a regular there, someone must know her. He had no intention of making a scene or interrogating Carrie. Not yet. But the bartender, the waiter, whoever, they could give him at least a clue. He returned to town in the evening, parking his car a couple of blocks from the bar. He didn't show up at home. Carrie still thought he was in Tacoma, and he wanted to keep it that way. At the motel, he changed clothes. Nothing fancy, just a guy stopping by for a beer after work. The phone with Carrie's photo was in my pocket, charged and ready. He didn't know what exactly he was looking for, but he knew that he wouldn't leave until he found something. Matt pushed the door open and stepped inside the bar. The smell of beer, fried potatoes, and something sour that hung in the air of old eateries hit my nose. There weren't many people around. A couple of men at the counter, a woman in the corner with a cigarette, a few voices from the pool table in the back. Music, some kind of blues with hoarse vocals, boomed from the speakers, drowning out snatches of conversation. Matt walked up to the bar, sat down on a high stool, and nodded to the bartender, a burly guy in his 30s with a short beard and an anchor tattoo on his forearm. He wiped his hands with a towel, threw it over his shoulder, and approached. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice low with a slight hoarseness. "Beer," Matt said, trying to sound relaxed. "Something local." The bartender nodded, turned to the tap, and poured the foaming IPA into the glass. Matt took it, took a sip, and looked around as if by chance. A plan was spinning in my head, simple, but risky. He didn't know how to start, but it was too late to retreat. "You don't come here often?" asked the bartender, wiping down the counter next to him. Casual chatter to fill the silence. "First time," Matt answered with a shrug. "A friend recommended it. He said it's fun here." The bartender chuckled, the corners of his lips twitching into a half-smile. "Fun, yes, especially when certain people stop by. We have our own stars here." Matt tensed, but kept his face. This was an opportunity. "Stars?" he asked, taking another sip. "Like who?" The bartender shrugged, but there was a hint of something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe amusement. "Well, there is one. Violetta, for example. Crazy thing. If she's in the mood, the evening will definitely be memorable." Matt felt his heart skip a beat. He put the glass on the counter, trying not to show the trembling in his hands. Violetta. The name sounded so casual, as if everyone here knew who they were talking about. He coughed and leaned a little closer. "Violetta," he said, as if he was just keeping up the conversation. "This is the one with dark hair?" The bartender narrowed his eyes, looking at him more closely. "Do you know her?" he asked, and there was a hint of wariness in his voice. Matt shook his head, giving a small smile. "I saw it briefly. A friend mentioned that she came here. I decided to check what the noise was about." The bartender relaxed and chuckled again. "Well, yes, she is like that. I was just lighting it yesterday. Red dress, heels, everything is just right. You won't get bored with her, that's for sure." Matt felt the blood rush to his face, but held back. It was a moment. He took out his phone, opened the gallery, and selected a photo of Carrie, a photo from last year's picnic. She stood by the lake, wearing jeans and a plaid shirt, smiling her soft, slightly timid smile. He turned the screen towards the bartender. "Is this her?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Just curious." The bartender leaned over, looking at the photo. His eyebrows rose, and then he straightened up, scratching his beard. "Well, sort of yes, sort of no," he said, frowning. "The face looks similar, yes. Dark hair, same eyes. But—" He hesitated, looking at Matt. "She appears here in different outfits. Dresses are brighter, you know, with a neckline down to the navel. And he behaves differently. This one of yours is like her sister, but not her." Matt nodded, putting his phone back in his pocket. "Got it," he said, finishing his beer. "Maybe it's just similar." "Maybe," the bartender agreed, but doubt flashed in his gaze. "Although, the face is too familiar." "Thanks for the beer," he said, standing up. "Maybe I'll stop by again." "Come on," the bartender responded, putting away the money. "If you meet Violetta, say hi. She loves to be remembered." Matt walked outside, breathing in the cold air. The neon sign blinked behind him, reflected in the puddles. He stood looking at the empty road and tried to collect thoughts. Matt put his hands in his pockets and walked to the car, feeling the cold creeping into his bones. Violetta was real, not just a name in a diary, but someone who was known, who was seen. And she lived with his wife. He got behind the wheel, started the engine, and thought, what next? After the bar, Matt returned to the hotel, picked up his things, and went home. Carrie was already asleep when he quietly opened the door. Her blue pajamas lay crumpled on the edge of the bed, and she was curled up under the covers, face buried in the pillow. Matt stood in the doorway, looking at her, and thought, who are you now? The one who bakes me pancakes, or the one who kisses strangers in dark alleys? He walked into the living room, took the diary out of its hiding place, the desk drawer where he hid it under old drawings, and sat down on the sofa. The lamplight fell on the worn cover, and he opened it again, as if he hoped the words would disappear. But they were there, sharp, alien, alive. He flipped through the pages, rereading the notes. Every word was like a knife, but he forced himself to read, to look for at least something, a hint, a date, a name. He needed to save it, to record it until he decided what to do with it. He got up, walked into the office, and turned on the old scanner that was collecting dust on the shelf. The wires became tangled, and he cursed as he untangled them with trembling hands. The first page lay on the glass, and the machine hummed, slowly copying the text. Matt stood over her, watching the letters appear on the laptop screen, black, sharp, unforgiving. He made copies one after another, without missing a line. When the last page was scanned, he collected the files into a folder, called it Documents_2025, nothing suspicious, in case Carrie accidentally stumbled upon it, and saved it to an external drive. He put the original back in the box, but now he had insurance. Proof. Is it true? He sat down, looking at the dark screen, and felt fatigue fall on his shoulders. But he couldn't sleep. My thoughts buzzed like a swarm of wasps. Matt spent the morning of the next day in a daze. Carrie left for work, kissing him on the cheek with the same soft smile, and he nodded, muttering something about, "See you in the evening." But as soon as the door closed, he grabbed the phone and started searching. He needed someone who could explain it: the diary, Violet, her memory lapses. He Googled psychotherapist Seattle, personality disorders, memory loss, until he came across the website of Dr. Laura Hayes, a psychiatrist with good reviews and an office downtown. He called, and the voice on the other end calm. Professionals said that there was a free window at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Matt agreed without hesitation. Dr. Hayes's office was in an old brick building near Pioneer Square. Matt walked up to the third floor, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what he would say, but he knew what he had to say. The door was opened by a woman of about 50, with short gray hair and warm brown eyes. Her suit gray, strict contrasted with the softness of her voice. "Matt Crawford?" she asked, holding out her hand. "I'm Dr. Hayes. Come on in." He shook her hand, walked into the office, and sat down in the chair opposite her desk. The room was cozy, books on the shelves, a plant in the corner, a window overlooking the street wet from the rain. But Matt felt like he was being interrogated. "Tell me what brought you here," she began, sitting down and opening her notebook. "You said on the phone that it was urgent." Matt took a breath, trying to form words. He didn't want to dump it all at once, but he couldn't delay it either. "This is about my wife," he said, looking at his hands. "She is acting strange, very strange, and I don't know what to do about it." Dr. Hayes nodded, her pen frozen over the paper. "Strange, how is that? Can you describe it?" He started slowly from that evening with wine and peignoir. He told about her memory lapses, about the whispers in the bathroom, about the diary without going into details, but mentioning someone else's handwriting and the name Violetta. He kept silent about the video, but said about the bar and the bartender, who knew her under a different name. With every word, he felt the tension in his chest growing, but his voice remained even. "She says she doesn't remember," he finished. "In the morning, she is my wife, as I know her, and then she's different, completely different, and I don't understand what's going on." Dr. Hayes was silent, looking at him carefully. Then she put down her pen and folded her hands on the table. "What you're describing sounds like possible dissociative identity disorder," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They used to call him multiple personalities. This is a condition in which different identities coexist within one person, each with its own traits, behavior, even memories. One of them may not know about the others." Matt frowned as he processed the words. "Are you saying that she has two personalities?" he asked, feeling his throat tighten. "Carrie and this Violetta?" "Perhaps," she replied. "It's not uncommon for one personality to be dominant, the one you know as Carrie, and the other to emerge in certain situations. Violetta, judging by your words, is more bright, impulsive. She can take control when Carrie is overwhelmed or vulnerable." "But why didn't I know?" He burst out. "We have been married for 2 years. I would have noticed." Dr. Hayes smiled slightly, but there was compassion in her eyes. "It's not always obvious. People with this disorder may hide symptoms even from themselves. Sometimes the trigger is stress, trauma, something that wakes up another part. You talked about the diary. This could be her way of communicating with herself. or Violetta's way of asserting herself? Matt gripped the armrests of his chair. Does she know? He asked quietly. Carrie, does she understand what is happening to her? Dr. Hayes hesitated, looking at him closely. It depends on whether she was diagnosed before, she said. If she asked for help, then perhaps yes. Treatment usually includes medications, mood stabilizers, sometimes antidepressants, and therapy. But without her history, I can't say for sure. Matt froze. Diagnosis. He remembered how Carrie had once mentioned the doctor a couple of years ago before their wedding. She said it was something with nerves, and he didn't dig. And now? Can I check? He asked, his voice trembling. If I give her name, will you be able to find out if someone like you had her? Dr. Hayes shook her head. This is confidential. But I can search the general database if she had an official diagnosis. Tell me her full name and date of birth. Carrie Ann Crawford, he said, feeling the words scratch his throat. Born March 14, 1994. She nodded, opened her laptop, and began typing. Matt watched her fingers run over the keys and felt time stretch like rubber. Finally, she looked up. There is a recording, she said quietly. 3 years ago, at a clinic in Bellevue. Diagnosis, dissociative identity disorder. Treatment was prescribed medication, a course of therapy. The last visit was a month before your wedding, judging by the dates. Matt felt the floor give out from under his feet. 3 years ago. She knew. She knew before they got married, before he put the ring on her finger, and she didn't say anything. So she hid it from me, he squeezed out, looking into emptiness. Not necessarily, Dr. Hayes said softly. She might not remember. Or I didn't want to scare you. But if treatment is stopped, this may explain why the symptoms returned. He nodded, although everything inside was screaming. He stood up, feeling his legs shaking. Thank you, he said. The voice was foreign. I need to think. She needs a specialist. If you want to bring her here, I'll help, she said, holding out a business card. This is not the end, Matt. This can be treated. He took the card, nodded, and left. Outside, the rain beat on the asphalt, but he did not feel the cold. She knew. And all this time, he lived with a woman who was not only his Carrie, but also someone else. Someone who laughed at him in the dark. Matt drove home from Dr. Hayes, gripping the steering wheel until his fingers turned white. The rain pattered on the windshield, blurring the city lights into hazy spots, but he barely noticed the road. Her words, dissociative disorder, she knew, treatment stopped, rang in his ears like alarm bells he couldn't turn off. She gave him one last piece of advice as he stood in the doorway. Be careful, Matt. If she doesn't know what you know, any pressure can break her. People with this diagnosis sometimes harm themselves. He nodded, but now these words weighed on him like a concrete slab. He parked at the house, turned off the engine, and sat for a minute, looking at the dark windows. Carrie hadn't returned yet. Her shift ended later. Matt got out of the car, walked up the steps, and pushed the door open. It was quiet inside, only the hum of the refrigerator disturbed the emptiness. He threw the keys on the table in the hallway and froze. The door of the closet in the bedroom, the same one where he found the diary, was slightly open. Not wide, just a couple of inches, but he definitely remembered closing it in the morning. My heart began to pound. He stepped closer, feeling a chill creeping up his spine. The closet looked the same. A stack of books, a box with a peignoir, a dark corner where the diary was hidden. Matt reached for it, pulled it out, and opened it. The pages smelled of old leather, but the last entry was new. The ink was fresh, slightly smeared, as if it had been written in a hurry. He swallowed and began to read. I'm pregnant. The test showed 2 lines yesterday, and I can't breathe with fear. It should be my child, mine and Matt's, but I'm not sure. Violet was there. I know these failures are for a reason. What if it's not his? She promised not to interfere and said she'd give it to me if I stopped taking the pills. I quit them a month ago. I thought she'd keep her word. But she's lying. She's taking over my body again. I feel it emptiness in my head, hours that I don't remember. I don't know what to do. If I tell him he'll leave, she'll take everything. Matt dropped the diary onto the bed as if it had burned him. Pregnant. 2 stripes. Violetta. He grabbed his head, trying to breathe. He walked around the room, his steps echoing loudly in the silence. Dr. Hayes said to be careful. She could hurt herself. And now he held in his hands proof that Carrie was on the edge, pregnant, scared, cornered. He didn't know how to approach this. Tell her what he knows, ask about the test, about Violetta, about everything, or wait until it breaks on its own. He sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the diary, and felt everything shaking inside. He was in shock, the same as she, but his shock was different, cold, heavy like stone. The door slammed. Matt winced, put the diary back in the closet, and closed the door. Carrie came in, brushing rain from her hair. Her face was pale, her eyes slightly red, as if she had been crying, but she put on a smile. "Hello," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're early today." "Yes," he answered, trying to sound even. "Finished my work early. How are you?" She shrugged, taking off her coat. Her movements were slow, as if she was stalling for time. "Okay," she said, looking to the side. "It was a hard day. Tired." Matt looked at her, trying to see at least a hint of pregnancy, of fear, of Violet. She walked to the sofa, sat down, wrapped her arms around herself, and stared at the floor. He sat down next to her, but not too close, feeling the air between them stretch like a string. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked. His voice was quiet but firm. "You look lost." She looked up, and for a second he thought she was going to cry. But she pursed her lips and shook her head. "I was just thinking," she said, looking away, "about everything. Nothing serious." "About what?" he insisted, even though Dr. Hayes was whispering in his head, "Careful. You can tell me." Carrie froze, her fingers tightening on the sleeve of her sweater. She opened her mouth, but then closed it, as if the words were stuck. Then she squeezed out a smile, weak, crooked. "Yes, that's nonsense," she said. "Work, you know, nerves." Matt nodded, although he was seething inside. She was lying. Not about work, about everything else. He saw it in her eyes, in the way she avoided looking at him. She was in a panic, as she wrote in her diary, but she was silent. I decided to remain silent. And he didn't know how to get the truth out without breaking it. The doctor had warned, and now he felt this risk sharp, like a blade. "If something is wrong, you will tell me, right?" he said, looking into her face. "I'm nearby." She nodded, quickly, too quickly, and stood up. "Of course," she said, going into the kitchen. "I'll go make some tea. Want?" "No," he answered, looking after her. "Thank you." She disappeared through the door, and Matt remained sitting, feeling the shock grip him. He needed a solution. 2 days later, the morning in Matt's house began with silence, but not the kind that calms, but the kind that presses, like before a thunderclap. He woke up before Carrie, lay in the dark, and looked at her sleeping silhouette. Her breathing was even, her face was soft, almost childlike, but he knew what was hidden behind it. He couldn't wait any longer, couldn't guess, couldn't take risks. Dr. Hayes said, "She needs to be treated," and he decided that was the only way. Not for her alone, but for both of them. The day before, he had spent hours on the phone calling clinics. The choice fell on Winterlake, a private establishment an hour's drive from Seattle, with a good reputation and strict confidentiality. He filled out the paperwork online, answered the administrator's questions. Yes, she is unstable. No, there was no threat yet. The diagnosis was made 3 years ago, and received confirmation. They were expecting her today. Matt stayed up half the night going over the plan, but by morning there was not an iota of doubt left in him. It was necessary. He stood up quietly, went into the kitchen, and made coffee more for himself than for the ritual. The hands moved mechanically. Pour water, turn on the machine, take out a cup. While the coffee dripped into the mug, he took the papers from the desk drawer, printed out paperwork, with Winterlake's seal and signature at the bottom. They lay cold, official, like a sentence. He folded them in half and placed them on the table next to her usual place. Carrie appeared half an hour later, barefoot, wearing the same blue pajamas. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were still sleepy. She smiled at him weakly, almost reflexively, and reached for the coffee pot. "Good morning," she said, her voice hoarse with sleep. "You're early." Matt didn't answer. He stood at the window, looking at the gray sky, and waited for her to sit down. She poured herself some coffee, walked over to the table, and froze. The papers lay folded in front of her, but the name of the clinic was still visible: Winter Lake Psychiatric Facility. Her hand with the cup trembled, coffee splashed onto the countertop. "What is this?" she asked quietly, without looking up. "Get ready, you have 10 minutes, they're waiting for us." 10 minutes later, she came out. Matt turned, stepped towards her, and took her coat from the hanger by the door. It was dark gray, slightly frayed on the sleeves, something she wore every day. He walked up to her, silently threw his coat over her shoulders, and extended his hand. "Let's go," he said. The voice was even, without emotion, as if he was asking her to go out to buy bread. Carrie looked at him, her face paled, her eyes widened. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck. Then her gaze fell on the papers, and she slowly reached out her hand, touching them with her fingertips, as if they could bite. Tears appeared almost immediately, first one, then another, rolling down my cheeks. "You finally found out," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. Matt didn't answer. He took her by the elbow, gently but firmly, and led her to the door. She didn't resist, she just cried quietly, without sobbing, as if the tears were flowing on their own. He opened the door and led her out onto the porch. The cold air hit her face, but Carrie didn't even shudder. She looked at him, tears glistening in the morning light, but there was something else in her eyes, not just fear, but understanding. Matt opened the passenger door of the car and helped her into it. She slumped in her seat and stared into space. He walked around the car, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. The radio was silent, only the hum of the engine filled the cabin. Carrie didn't say another word, only sniffled occasionally, wiping her face with the sleeve of her coat. The road to Winter Lake was silent. Matt looked at the highway, at the wet asphalt, at the trees flashing outside the window. He felt no anger, no pain, only fatigue, deep to the bone. He didn't explain anything to her, didn't ask, didn't shout. It wasn't necessary. She said everything in one phrase: "You finally found out," and that was enough. The clinic appeared an hour later, a white building with a pointed roof, surrounded by pine trees. Matt parked at the entrance, got out, and opened her door. Carrie looked up at him. Her tears had already dried, leaving red marks on her cheeks. "For what?" she asked. Her voice was weak, almost inaudible. He didn't answer. He simply took her hand, helped her out, and led her to the door. Inside, they were met by a woman in a white coat, an administrator, with a warm smile and a folder in her hands. "Mr. Crawford," she said, looking at him, "we are ready to receive your wife." Matt nodded and handed her the papers. Carrie stood nearby, looking at the floor, her fingers gripping the hem of her coat. The receptionist said something about the ward, about the doctor who would be coming soon, but Matt barely listened. He turned to Carrie, met her gaze empty, lost, and stepped back. "You need help," he said. She nodded, barely noticeably, and turned away. The woman in the robe gently took her by the elbow and led her down the corridor. Matt watched her figure disappear behind turning and felt something break inside. He turned around, went outside, and got into the car. The engine hummed again, but he did not move. I just sat looking at the white wall of the clinic and thought, is this the end of their story? There was no answer, only silence and the cold wind knocking on the glass. Matt returned to Winter Lake 3 days after leaving Carrie. He didn't call or write, he just waited for the clinic to contact him. On the morning of the third day, the phone rang, and the voice on the other end, calm, professional, said, "Mr. Crawford, you should come. We are ready to discuss your wife's condition." Matt didn't ask for details. He gathered himself in silence, got into the car, and drove off, feeling the road pulling him back to what he was trying to distance himself from. The clinic greeted him with the same white facade and the smell of pine trees, But now there was more movement inside nurses with folders, a quiet hum of voices in the corridors. Matt walked to the front desk, gave his name, and was ushered into a small office on the second floor. At the table sat a man of about 60, thin, with short gray hair and glasses on the tip of his nose. His robe was slightly wrinkled, but his gaze was sharp and attentive. "Matt Crawford?" he asked, standing up and extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Richard Keller, your wife's lead psychiatrist. Have a seat." Matt shook his hand, sat down on the chair opposite him, and nodded. His throat was dry, but he didn't ask for water, he just waited. Keller opened the folder on the table, skimmed the notes, and looked up. "We conducted a full examination of Carrie," he began, his voice even, without unnecessary intonations. "She's physically stable, but her mental state is complicated. Dissociative identity disorder, as you indicated, is confirmed. Based on her history and current symptoms, it has gone too far." Matt gripped the chair's arms, but kept his face motionless. "What do you mean, too far?" he asked, his voice low and reserved. Keller took off his glasses, put them on the table, and folded his hands. "Her core personality, the one you know as Carrie, is severely suppressed," he said. "The second identity, which she calls Violetta, has become dominant. This is not uncommon when left untreated for a long time. She told us about lapses in memory, about moments when she woke up in unfamiliar places. Violetta is active, impulsive, and apparently does not want to give up control. Carrie is afraid of her, but cannot resist." Matt nodded, even though his gut tightened. He saw Violetta on video, in the bar, in their living room. He knew what she was capable of. But hearing this from the doctor, coldly and clearly, was like a blow to the gut. "Can she be cured?" he asked, looking into Keller's eyes. The doctor paused, choosing his words. "Treatment is possible," he said finally, "but it takes time. We started drug therapy stabilizers to balance her condition and mild sedatives to reduce anxiety, plus individual sessions to strengthen Carrie and perhaps integrate Violet. It's a long process, months, maybe a year, and there are no guarantees that it will become the same." Matt was silent, digesting. Year. A whole year in this white box, with pills and other people's voices in my head. He pictured Carrie, her hunched shoulders, her quiet laugh, and realized that he didn't know if she would come back at all. But there was one more question that burned him the most. He coughed and leaned a little closer. "She's pregnant," he said, his voice becoming harsher. "I found a test. And in her diary, she wrote that she was not sure whose child it was. I want to know." Keller raised his eyebrows, but quickly pulled himself together. He opened the folder again and flipped through a couple of pages. "Yes, we confirmed the pregnancy," he said. "About 6 weeks. She herself told us yesterday, during the session. Very scared, but physically okay." Matt clenched his teeth. 6 weeks. It could have been his. They were together in those days, before all that darkness. But Violetta, she was with that guy with the tattoo, and who knows who else. He looked at the doctor, feeling how everything inside was freezing. "I want a DNA test," he said, the words falling hard as stones. "For a child, until he was born. Is this possible?" Keller nodded, but something flashed in his gaze, not condemnation, but caution. "It's possible," he answered. "There is a procedure called a non-invasive prenatal test. Blood is taken from the mother, fetal DNA is isolated and compared with yours. It's safe, but you need her consent. And yours, of course." "Mine is," Matt said sharply, "and ask her. She must know what I'm asking." Keller wrote something down in a folder and nodded. "Okay," he said. "I'll talk to her today. If she agrees, we will do the test next week. The results will be out in a couple of days." Matt leaned back in his chair, feeling the tension in his chest release slightly. Test. This was a chance to find out the truth, not about Violet, not about Carrie, but about the child. His child or not. He didn't know what he would do with the answer, but he needed to know. "Where is she now?" he asked, looking at the table. "Room 42, Keller answered. "It's at the end of the corridor to the right." You can see it if you want. But not for long, she is still adapting. Matt nodded and stood up. The doctor watched him go, but didn't add anything. Matt left the office and walked down the corridor, counting the doors. 38, 39, 40, 42. He stopped, knocked quietly, and opened the door. Carrie sat by the window in hospital pajamas, gray, faceless. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her hands were resting on her knees. She turned her head, saw him, and her eyes the same gray-green that he knew darkened. "Matt," she said, her voice weak but alive. "You came." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. She looked at him, and in her gaze there was everything: fear, guilt, fatigue. But he did not talk about the child, about his father-in-law, about Violetta. He just sat down opposite, silently, and nodded. "How are you?" he asked, although the answer was visible in her haggard face. "I don't know," she answered, lowering her eyes. "They say I will feel better, but I don't feel like myself." Matt nodded again. He wanted to say something, that he also didn't know who she was, that he was afraid for her, for himself, for everything. But the words stuck. He just sat there, looking at her until the silence became unbearable. "I have to go," he said finally, standing up. "Rest." She didn't answer, just looked after him as he left. The morning at the Winter Lake Clinic began with cold light streaming through the narrow windows in the hallway and the faint sound of droplets hitting the glass outside. Matt arrived here at 7 o'clock after Dr. Keller called the day before. "The test results are back. She wants to see you." He did not sleep half the night, lay in an empty apartment, looking at the ceiling, until the decision to divorce cold, difficult, inevitable took root in him completely. He gathered himself in silence, took the documents that he had prepared yesterday, and drove off, not looking at the gray sky over Seattle. The clinic was quiet, only the steps of nurses and the occasional creaking of carts broke the morning emptiness. Matt walked to the front desk, gave his name, and was directed to the visiting room on the second floor. It was a small cell with white walls, a table in the middle and two chairs, one metal, the other with soft upholstery, worn at the corners. On the table was a plastic mug of tea black with a spoonful of sugar, as Carrie liked it, and a sealed folder with the clinic's logo. Nearby lay an envelope with divorce documents that he had brought with him. He didn't sit down, he just stood at the window, looking at the wet pine trees outside the glass, until the door opened. Carrie entered, led by the nurse, a young woman in a blue uniform, who nodded to Matt and quietly left, closing the door. Carrie looked smaller than usual. Her gray hospital pajamas were hanging loose, her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and there were shadows under her eyes. She stopped at the table, looking at the folder with the dough and the documents he placed next to the cup. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't sit down, she just stood there, hunched over, as if she was afraid to take up too much space. "You have come," she said. Her voice was hoarse, weak, almost inaudible in the sterile silence of the room. She rubbed her palms as if she were cold, although the air in the clinic was warm, with a slight smell of antiseptic. Matt nodded, turned to her, and stepped closer. He reached out his hand, touched her head, his fingers slid through her cold, tangled hair and stroked her, briefly, almost mechanically. She looked up, and her gray-green eyes, familiar, but now so distant, sparkled with tears. "I asked for tea," she said, nodding at the mug. I don't know why. Just a habit." He removed his hand, looked at her pale face, at her trembling fingers, and felt the words he had been carrying inside him all the way finally come out. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice low but solid, like a concrete wall. "You should have been honest from the very beginning. From the day I put a ring on you. I deserved to know." Carrie shuddered, her lips pursed, and the tears she had been trying to hold back burst out. They flowed slowly, leaving shiny trails on her cheeks, and she covered her mouth with her hand to muffle her sobs. Her shoulders shook, but she did not turn away. She looked at him, as if clinging to his gaze. "I'm sorry," she breathed, her voice breaking like thin ice. "Matt, forgive me. I didn't mean to deceive you. I thought I could keep her in line, that she would go away if I tried. But I couldn't cope. I was so afraid that you would leave if you found out. Sorry." Matt listened but didn't move. Her words were sincere. He saw it in her eyes, in her trembling voice, in the way she clenched her hands as if trying to hold herself back. But sincerity did not change anything. He stepped toward the table, picked up the divorce papers, a thin stack of paper with his signature on it, cold and formal, and placed them in front of her, next to the cup and folder of dough. "This is not about a child," he said, looking into her eyes. "Not about the test. This is about us. I can't live with this, with the fact that you hid it, with the fact that I don't know who you really are. I'm tired, Carrie." She looked at the papers, her breath hitching. Tears dripped onto the table, leaving small dark stains on the plastic. She reached out and touched the documents with trembling fingers, but did not take them. She simply froze, as if she was afraid that they would crumble into dust. "Have you decided everything?" she asked, her voice weak, almost pleading. Without even looking at the results, Matt took the folder with the test and opened it. The sheet was simple, a table of numbers, percentages, a line at the bottom. DNA match, 99.9%. Father, Matt Crawford. The child was his. He placed the paper on the table, open for her to see, and stepped back. "It's yours," she said, sobbing. Her voice trembled, but hope flickered in it, faint, like a light in the wind. "Our, Matt, this is our baby. Will you take him?" The question hit him like cold air. She looked at him. Her eyes were red, wet, full of pain and pleading. She clenched her hands into fists, waiting for an answer, but Matt remained silent. He looked at her haggard face, at her hunched shoulders, and felt everything shrinking inside. Carrie began to cry harder, her sobs echoing off the white walls. She lowered her head, her hair falling over her face, covering her eyes, and sobbed quietly, clutching the hem of her pajamas. The tea stood untouched. Steam rose in a thin stream and dissolved in the air. Matt looked at her, feeling the silence pressing on him, but did not move. He made his decision even before this morning, before her tears, before her, "I'm sorry." The test was very important, but it did not change his decision. "I'll talk to the doctor," he finally said, his voice as cold as the walls around him. "You will stay here. You need treatment. I can't take you back." She raised her head, her face was wet, her eyes were red, but she did not object. She only sobbed louder when he stepped towards the door. He knocked for a nurse, and she came in almost immediately, the same woman in a blue uniform, with a neutral smile on her face. "Mr. Crawford, are you finished?" she asked, looking at him. "Yes," he answered without turning around. "I'm leaving." Carrie called to him when he was already at the door. "Matt," her voice broke, weak, desperate. "Please, say something. Will you pick him up?" He stopped, his hand clenching the door handle. Her question hung in the air, heavy as a stone, but he did not answer. Didn't turn around. Not because he didn't know, he just couldn't. He stepped into the corridor, the door closed behind him with a quiet click, and her sobs were left behind. The nurse stayed with her, and Matt walked towards the exit, feeling the cold air of the clinic chilling to his bones. He walked down to the first floor, walked past the front desk, and stopped at Keller's office. The door was slightly open, and the doctor looked up from his papers when Matt knocked. "Matt," Keller said, taking off his glasses, "have you seen her?" "Yes," he answered, his voice level but empty. "She will stay here. I gave her divorce papers. Test. My child. But I don't know what to do with it yet." Keller nodded and wrote something down on his notepad. "We will continue treatment," he said. "She's shocked, but that's expected. Give her time. And for myself, too." Matt nodded, although nothing moved inside. He pulled out of the parking lot 10 minutes later, leaving Winterlake behind. The road home was long, empty as his thoughts. The child was his, a fact he could not ignore. But Carrie, she was a stranger, even now, when she was sobbing in that room. He didn't know if he would take the child. I didn't know if he could be a father after all this, and I didn't want to decide right now. Matt wakes up early, just before dawn breaks. He is 32, and perhaps for the first time he feels like a real adult, a real man whose life has acquired long-awaited clarity. Somewhere outside the windows, the city is already noisy, waking up to a new day, but the house is still quiet. On the left in the bed, Julie is sleeping sweetly, his wife of 3 years. Her long reddish honey hair was scattered across the pillow, and a warm smile of sleep froze on her lips. He looks at her for a few seconds, feeling gratitude, love, and peace that fill his heart with every drop of morning light. Almost 5 years had passed since he last saw Carrie he knew during their marriage. However, knew is a strong word. It turned out that he did not know the most important thing about her then. After the divorce and painful separation, life began to spin so quickly that sometimes he himself was amazed at how much everything had changed. But this morning, filled with silence and the soft breathing of his loved ones, makes it clear. Everything that once happened led him exactly to where he was supposed to be. A slight movement in the hallway tells him that his eldest son, Mike, is also awake. Mike is 4. An energetic, inquisitive boy whose unbridled imagination can turn even ordinary kitchen utensils into props for battles with dragons. Mike also has permanently askew hair and a habit of running barefoot around the house, despite the repeated comments of his dad and mom. Julie always laughs, shrugging. "Who is he? I loved the socks and slippers." "So it's me," Matt smiles. It seems to him that their son inherited from him all this passion for running and freedom, although he himself still would not dare to run around the house barefoot, knowing how many toys, magazines, and other things could be lying in the hallway. The second child is a daughter, Polly, who is 1 year and almost 3 months old. Her truly tiny figure should now be sleeping peacefully in her crib, hugging her fluffy elephant. Polly has big blue eyes, a serious look, and a smart expression on her face, as if she already understands that the whole world belongs to her. Matt loves to pick her up, throw her up not too high so as not to scare her, and listen to her boisterous laughter. She laughs loudly, sincerely, with all her tiny being. And finally, they have another baby or little girl on the way. They did not find out the gender, deciding that it would be a surprise for everyone. Julie's belly is already quite large, and some nights she tosses and turns, trying to find a comfortable position, and Matt rubs her back, whispering about how wonderful life will be with another child. He takes his promise seriously. When they got married, they both swore not to hide anything from each other. No more secrets, no more omissions, only honesty, support, and going through any difficulties together. Julie was his longtime friend, to whom he once entrusted the search for a new home after a divorce. After all, she worked as a realtor and knew all the intricacies of real estate transactions. And it was then, after difficult months filled with guilt, disappointment, and inner devastation, that something suddenly flared up in him that he could not name for a long time. Attachment, friendship, gratitude, and then everything mixed into one warm, healing flame of love. Matt inspected the houses she showed him, but it wasn't the mortgage terms or communications issues that were on his mind. He was looking at her. Her walk, her melodious laugh, the way she gesticulates widely when she is overwhelmed with enthusiasm. She knew him for a long time, saw him at different periods of his life, but at the same time she remained open and real, did not ask unnecessary questions, and did not get into his soul. And when, after several months of friendship and dinners together, they discovered mutual attraction, everything seemed to turn upside down, but at the same time it took on such meaning that one did not want to retreat. He was afraid of being judged, afraid of hurting her, afraid that his own fears would get in the way. But Julie proved to be a calm beacon in his storm. "I'm not in a hurry," she said then. "Let's just be honest with each other." These words became the foundation of their relationship, their new home and new family. Matt has been raising Mike since birth, and Julie, having become his stepmother, although she hates this word, has accepted the boy as her own. The story of this child is the most difficult thing Matt has gone through in his life. A child born to Carrie, but left with Matt by mutual consent. The same child he once didn't know if he could accept. The one about which Carrie said after leaving the clinic, "Please, just don't tell him who his biological mother was. I don't want him to associate his childhood with illness, with fears." May he have a happy childhood. Let him know only your home and your love. Send me a photo and let that be enough. They signed the necessary papers and completed the paperwork so that Matt would become the boy's official guardian due to his mother's health condition. Matt is eternally grateful to Julie for her understanding. She never tried to crowd out that part of his life. She accepted both the child and the fact that this boy has a mother somewhere who is not actively involved, but for whom it is important to receive photographs. Mike was born healthy and strong, thanks to which Matt gradually learned to accept that the child was not at risk of inheriting any mental disorders and that Carrie would not pass on Violetta to him. Doctors assured that such a direct transfer of identity was impossible. But deep down in his soul, Matt remembered that wild fear. What if this boy grows up and someone else also lives in his head? Now he is a completely ordinary child, cheerful, noisy, loves to build houses from chairs and blankets, and also imagines that every bush is a magical labyrinth. He adores Julie, calls her mom, loves to tinker with Polly, tries to explain to her how the world works, although he himself understands it no more than all the children in the world. What about Carrie? 5 years have passed since then, and they continue to communicate occasionally, by email as a rule, because it's easier to distance oneself from emotions. Matt regularly sends her photos of Mike, and in return she sends short but warm messages. Thank you. He has grown so much. Or, is he sick? Is everything okay? She wanted to call a couple of times, but Matt suggested limiting herself to letters. He himself is afraid that the call may awaken something painful in him, old memories, old pity that he does not want to feel either for her or for himself. Occasionally, she writes about her life, that she went to work, that she met a man who knows about her diagnosis and treats him with understanding. She says that they found a way not to drive Violet into a dark corner, but also not to let her ruin the relationship. And what's most interesting is that they realized that if you give Violet freedom from time to time in their bedroom, then she won't really interfere in their lives. Apparently, they have a very busy sex life. Matt sometimes stops after such lines, reads them, and the memory of those days when Violetta came to his house under the guise of Carrie flashes through his head. But then he simply closes the letter. This is her life, he tells himself. He feels relieved knowing that she is happy, that she has learned to live with herself and her other personality. Today is a normal weekday, with one small exception. Julie has a follow-up ultrasound, and although they don't want to find out the sex of the baby, the doctor has to say whether everything is okay, what the position of the fetus is, and whether there are any abnormalities. Matt is worried. It's his third child, but it's still exciting. He decides that he will spend the morning with the children, take Mike to kindergarten, and leave Polly with her grandmother, Julie's mother, who promised to come and help with child care. Then he and his wife will go to the clinic together. He sneaks out of the bedroom quietly so as not to wake Julie, and finds Mike in the hallway, already pulling his shorts back to front and trying to fit into a t-shirt, not the one his father prepared for him. Dad, look what I drew, Mike declares enthusiastically, handing over a piece of paper with scribbles. There are monsters, planes, clouds, and what looks like a huge pine tree on it. Wow, a real painting, Matt praises, taking a closer look at the drawing. Let's tell you who's who here later, okay? First, you need to dress appropriately. Mike laughs. And I want it like this. Backwards, this means that the t-shirt will be magical. Matt sighs and smiles. Just like him as a child, stubborn and headlong in his own worlds. He doesn't insist, he just shrugs. Okay, let it be magical. While eating breakfast, they suddenly hear Polly wake up and start cackling in her crib. Matt turns to Mike. Will you get me a diaper from the dresser while I go to my little sister? Mike races eagerly. It's almost a rescue mission for him to bring a diaper and maybe even a rattle. Finally, the whole family gathers. Mike and Polly have breakfast with porridge, which Julie managed to prepare before lying down again. She now needs rest, especially in the last months of pregnancy. Matt offers to take Mike to kindergarten, and Polly, meanwhile, to her grandmother, who has already arrived and is ready to take her granddaughter before lunch, while the parents are in the hospital. "How are you?" Matt asks Julie as she leaves the bedroom, adjusting her long maternity shirt as she goes. "I think you need to rest more." Sit down, I'll do everything." Julie smiles gratefully and takes a glass of water. "Thank you, darling. Yes, I'm kind of tired today. Everything was spinning at night. I couldn't sleep. The baby was spinning around inside as if he was having a party." She runs her hand over her stomach, and Matt does the same carefully, feeling the slight tremors. Each such moment fills him with a mixture of surprise and happiness, which have already become familiar, but have not lost their sharpness. "It's still great that we don't know who it is," Julie says, laughing. "It seems that these days everyone wants to find out their gender in advance, choose a name, and even predict their future profession. But I'm pleased not to know." "Well, the main thing is that everything is fine," Matt replies. "A boy or a girl. We will love anyone with all our hearts." Julie agrees, takes his hand, and kisses him briefly before moving to the window, where Polly is already waiting for her, reaching out to her mother with her plump arms. Returning home in the evening after all the shopping, Matt and Julie discuss what to give Mike for his birthday, and Matt finds himself thinking, "I never thought that I would live a life in which there were so many worries, and at the same time so much peace." He remembers how he once stood in a bar on Pike Street, spying on Carrie and feeling despair. He remembers that diary with someone else's handwriting. He remembers how he took her to Winter Lake, how he signed the divorce papers. Now all this seems like a distant dream, almost unreal, although he knows, without these trials, there would be no current harmony. Later, when silence has completely enveloped the house, and the noise of the dishes in the sink has already died down, Matt and Julie are sitting on the veranda, wrapped in light blankets. "I once dreamed of such an evening," says Julie, looking at the rare stars above the city, "so that there is a man nearby who is not afraid of my questions and does not lie, so that my children sleep in a house full of love and peace, so that I feel truly at home." Matt, sitting in a wicker chair, quietly answers, "Sometimes I think about how we got to this point. After all, it all started with the fact that I was full of problems. You showed me a house that I ultimately didn't buy because it turned out to have a lot of defects. And then you showed the next one. And then we had dinner," Julie smiles, "and I asked you about drawings and projects, and you answered in such detail that I almost fell asleep while eating pasta." They both laugh. This memory now seems touching. They speak in whispers so as not to disturb the children, and Matt leans in to kiss his wife. Her lips are warm, and in this kiss there is no passion seething in the veins, rather, it is an expression of home comfort, quiet happiness that binds them. "Tomorrow, by the way, we need to call the doctor," she recalls. "Make an appointment for your next appointment, and decide when you will go on a business trip just in case, if everything goes without complications. But you can always refuse a business trip, right?" "True," he agrees. "My project is almost under control. I will be able to delegate some of the work." Julie nods, moves away a little, and bites her lip, looking into his eyes. "Don't you regret anything about what happened many years ago?" Matt sighs. "If I hadn't gone through everything that happened with Carrie, her diagnosis, the hospital, the divorce, I might not have appreciated it. I wouldn't be able to love our children so much. I wouldn't appreciate your openness. I have never had an example of a family where everything is built on the truth. I am grateful to fate that I ended up here, next to you." Julie smiles, and boundless tenderness is visible in her eyes. She knows Matt's past is part of his journey, even if it's full of dark moments. She also had difficulties. Everyone has them. But now they have learned to overcome together what can creep out of the shadows. "I was thinking," she says, taking a short pause, "maybe we can go somewhere on vacation, until I got too big. For a couple of days, at least." Matt smiles. "Sounds good. Just to find someone to leave the children with. Granny obviously won't do it, but maybe we can ask Jack and Amy," Julie suggests, snorting with laughter. "We'll decide tomorrow," he agrees and yawns. "Maybe we'll find somewhere to live by the ocean for a couple of days." Mike and Polly will be happy. Our little team, Julie laughs quietly. At that moment, Mike appears at the veranda door, rubbing his eyes. He leaves quietly, his bare feet slapping on the floor. Matt winces. "Why aren't you sleeping, buddy?" "I want some water," Mike mutters sleepily. Matt stands up and picks him up. "Come with me, I'll give you a glass, then go back to bed." He kissed Julie on the top of her head and, with a familiar gesture, gently touched her cheek. She smiled, raised an eyebrow questioningly. "What?" And he just shook his head, saying, "Nothing, everything is fine." Then he picked up Mike and they went into the house. This is their home, their life, their real, adult, and honest story, a story in which joy, pain, and a new beginning are intertwined with strong ties. And in this story, everyone seems to have found their place. Perhaps someday Mike will want to meet his biological mother. Perhaps there will come a time when he and Carrie sit down at the same table again. But this will be a different conversation without the same anxiety, without secret diaries, without false smiles. Everything is going as usual. In the meantime, the wind turns the pages of life further, and above the house in Capitol Hill, yes, it was there that Matt decided to find a new hearth, a high sky, on which the orange reflections of the sunset are slowly appearing. And in the light of this sunset, it is clearly visible. The main thing is that both shadows and light have learned to coexist without destroying each other. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.